Maseches Nazir Daf Beis. Maseches Nazir begins almost identically to Maseches Nedarim. It begins by discussing when one makes the neder of Nazirus. Nazirus, as we know, is a vow that one will keep a special higher level of Kedusha, which includes 3 halachos, that he will not cut his hair, that he will not eat or drink anything that comes from a vine, and that he will not become tamei to a mace. It is a neder. The Torah defines it as a neder, and that's why it follows the halachos of Nedarim. Tomorrow we'll discuss that a bit. So we follow again the pattern of Maseches Nedarim. We begin by discussing kinuyim and yados. A kinoi is a word that is similar to nazir, similar to the phraseology that one would think one would use to make the neder, the vow of nazirus. As we'd seen in Maseches Nedarim, is a machlokes why kinuyim work, why these other words work. And yados is a similar but different concept, is where you don't say the full language of the vow, you just say a partial vow. The Mishnah will discuss those two things. The Gemara will discuss why is Maseches Nazir here? What does it have to do with the flow of Shas? Then the Gemara will get into the language of the Mishnah. It seems to be out of order. It should have explained things in the same order that it introduced them. And the Gemara will get into a very similar discussion as to what the correct order of things are and how that informs on this Mishnah. So let's begin the Mishnah. The Mishnah again discusses kinuyim, and it does not mention yados straight out. So it says that there are kinuyim. Any other type of similar term for nazirus works as nazirus. Then it skips examples of kinuyim and goes straight to examples of yados, even though it doesn't mention yados. The Gemara says we have to insert here that it also mentions yados. And now it gives examples of yados. So the classic language of a neder of nazirus is someone says ehei nazir, I will be a nazir, I will be in nazirus. So if somebody says ehei, just I will be, so the Mishnah says that's a valid yad, it's a valid abbreviated phrase for making the vow of nazirus. Or if he says ehei no, I'll be beautiful, so we assume that he's referring to the fact he's going to have long hair, and therefore that is a vow of nazirus as well. Those are examples of yados. Again, the Gemara will ask why we're inserting examples of yados if we just talked about kinuyim. And now we go to examples of kinuyim. Again, other words that also mean nazir and can also be used to make a vow of nazir. So you have here nazik, nazich, pazich, all those work. Now the Gemara gives some other ways of saying nazirus. If he says hareini kazeh, I am like this, or if he says hareini misalsel, I am with my hair, or he says hareini bechalkel, I'm supported, harei alai l'shalach para, I have to send the lock of hair, referring to the hair that has to be cut at the end of nazirus. All these are a valid nazirus. Now if he says harei alai tzipirim, I have to bring birds, that's the 2 korbanos that one would have to bring if he becomes tamei as a nazir. So here you have a machlokes, the Gemara will explain it. Rabbi Meir says it is a valid nazir, and the Chachamim say it's not a valid nazir. So the Gemara begins. The Gemara's first discussion is why is nazir in seder nashim at all? What does it have to do with women? It's not anything to do with it. Now we understand why Nedarim is in Seder Nashim, because a lot of Hilchos Nedarim is connected to a husband-wife relationship. They have the halachos of Hafara, for example. But why is Nazirus here? So the Gemara says the reason why Nazirus is here is because the parsha discussing divorce refers to a ervas davar. It refers to when a man sees something inappropriate and improper in his wife. That is really the only circumstance in which he should be divorcing her. So who causes what? How is that inappropriate behavior caused? It's caused by drinking wine, and therefore the nazir will take inspiration from that, and he will avoid wine, like it says, "Kol haroy yisayte b'kukuli azer atzmo min hayayin." Somebody who sees a sota, a woman who is adulterous, in her disgrace, should prevent wine from himself, and therefore he'll become a nazir. And that's how nazirus ends up in Seder Nashim. Now, why is it in this order? So that the Rishonim explain that really we should have mentioned Sota right after Ksubas. Ksubas is the main beginning of Seder, is the mainstay of Seder Nashim. It talks about the obligations that a man and a wife have to each other. So right after that, we should have gone straight into Sota, which is the halachos that come out of a violation of the Ksuba. But as a prelude to Sota, before Sota, we have in Ksubas, we talk about Nedarim. We have the Perek HaMadir, which talks about Nedarim and how it affects the husband-wife relationship. Therefore, we introduce Mesechas Nedarim, and once we're talking about Nedarim, we get into Nazirus, because Nazir is a type of Neder, and the Mishnah, the Rishonim explained, the Gemara here was only asking why is it in the Seder. Once you know why it's in the Seder, then you could use the Rishonim's explanation for why it's in this order. Okay, now let's get back to the Gemara. The Gemara wants to know why we started talking about Kinuyin and then we gave examples of Yados. We didn't mention Yados at all. So Gemara says there's a line missing. You have to insert that there are Kinuyim and there are Yados. Now, and then we start giving examples of Yados, like he says, a hey, or any of those. The Gemara says if you first mention Kinuyim and then you mention Yados, you should first give examples of Kinuyim and only then examples of Yados. Why do you give examples of Yados first? It's out of order. So the Gemara says, no, that is the style of Mishnayos. They give two headings, and then they start talking about the latter heading first, meaning they pick up from the last heading that they mentioned. And the Gemara gives three examples of this. It says in Masechah Shabbos, "B'meh madlikin u'b'meh ein madlikin," what types of oils or waxes do we use to light, and what do we not use? And it starts explaining right away, ein madlikin we don't use, and then it gives you the list. It also talks about what you can do hatmana. It says b'meh taimnim b'meh ein taimnim. What can you use for insulating a pot? What can you not use for insulating a pot? And again, it begins by explaining what you are not allowed to use first. It says ein taimnim. And the third one is b'meh sheyotza b'meh ein isha yotza. What is a woman allowed to wear in the street that's not carrying? What is she not allowed to wear in the street? And again, it starts by explaining what she can't wear. So those are three examples. Now, the Gemara counters by saying that here are two examples where you said a list and then you start explaining the first thing first. So you have what is an animal allowed to carry in the street. So it says b'meh behema yotza, b'meh eino yotza, and it starts explaining first. Grumel is allowed to carry the following thing. So it starts explaining the first part of the list first. And then you have, in the halachas of inheritance, you have certain types of relationships. One is bequeathing to the other and inherits from that one. So you have yesh nochlin u'manchilin. Then you have nochlin v'lo manchilin. You can inherit but not bequeath to them. You have manchilin v'lo nochlin. You can bequeath but not inherit. Then you have lo nochlin v'lo manchilin, that there is no inheriting going in either direction at all. And when we start explaining it, we first explain elu nochlin u'manchilin. That's the first thing on the list. So therefore, you brought me two examples where we start explaining the last thing on the list first, and I brought you two examples where you start explaining the first thing on the list first. So therefore, you can't conclude what the standard practice is. Why are you supposed to? Which one are you supposed to be explaining first? So therefore, we still don't have an explanation. So the Gemara therefore wants to say, the explanation is as follows. When the discussion is about an isser that applies to the person, so that would be what to light, what to do hatmana, and what to carry, the person. So that's a heavy isser, it's an isser on the person. We start explaining that side which is usser first. We start explaining the forbidden things first because it's a heavy isser. When it's just about your animals, so you're talking about b'meh behema yotza, so there you start explaining the heter side first. It's not so severe, it's only an animal related heter. Now, as far as yesh nochlin, the reason that we talked about yesh nochlin first is because the first relationship, the example of the first kind of yesh nochlin u'manchilin, is a father and a son. That is the classic example of inheritance. Therefore, we started talking about that one first. So Gemara says, okay, you've given me an explanation for why we started by examples of yados. However, how does it have any effect, your explanation, on kinuyim versus yados? We could sometimes start with the first thing on the list, sometimes start with the last thing on the list. You told me that I want to start with the more severe isser, or I want to start with the ikr thing. Yados and kinuyim, neither of them qualify for either of those. So why should we do yados before kinuyim? So the Gemara therefore gives a different answer. The Gemara says it's because the halach of yados comes from a drasha. It's something which comes from a drasha is a chiddush, and it's more beloved to the Tana. And therefore he mentions it first. And the Gemara in Nedarim tells us what the drasha is. Lahazir, neder, lahazir, extra word, which teaches me the halacha of where it says lindar neder nazir lahazir. There we have the halacha of yados. Now, so the Gemara therefore says that's why we mentioned that one first. So the Gemara asks if that's true. So why did it not mention them in the list first if it's more beloved first? So the Gemara says the reason is because the main carbon, meaning the main naziros, is the phrase. Meaning to say, we have to know what type of word creates a chiyuv carbon. The main halacha of Nazir is you have to know how to say it. So you have to know which words, and therefore that's more central. That's why we listed it first. But in explanation, we explain the one which is more central first. All right, now the Gemara moves on to its next discussion, which is we said that an example of yados is if he says ehei, I will be. Someone says, how do you know that ehei? What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. Maybe I will be means I will be in a fast. Ehei b'tainis. How do you know he means to say I'm going to be a Nazir? So the Gemara answers, the Gemara quotes Shmuel, who says that there was a Nazir passing by and he said, ehei, he must mean I'm going to be like the Nazir. So now the Gemara gets into the discussion of Yadayim Achichos and Yadayim She'ein Achichos, also a discussion we had in the beginning of Maseches Nedarim. So there are three levels of clarity. There's something which is absolutely clear, and if it's straight out. Then there is something which is ambiguous, but it's most likely that we know what you mean. That would be called Yadayim Mochichos. And then you have something which is very far from clear. It's pretty ambiguous. That would be called Yadayim She'ein Mochichos. So the Gemara's first assumption is that if you have a Nazir walking by and the guy says, I'm going to be, that's Yadayim Mochichos. So Gemara says, Shmuel seems to be saying that you have to have, that has to be the case. If he just says hey without a Nazir walking by, that's Yadayim She'ein Mochichos. So Shmuel says that's no good. It's got to be that the Nazir is walking by. That means Shmuel holds you have to have Yadayim Mochichos. You have to have one which is pretty reasonable for us to figure out what it is. So the Gemara answers, no, there's a fourth level. If it would be no Nazir walking by and a guy just says, hey, that's not even Yadayim She'ein Mochichos. That's nothing. You have absolutely no idea what he's talking about. And therefore, Shmuel, who says that it has to be that the Nazir is passing in front of him, could it be if you would have something which would be Yadayim She'ein Mochichos, Shmuel would agree that that would work. But if you don't have a Nazir walking by, it's not even Yadayim She'ein Mochichos. It's nothing at all. It's impossible to learn anything from that. He could very easily mean ehei b'tainis or something along those lines. Okay, now the Gemara asks, is it really true that when he says ehei and then there's a Nazir walking by, he's saying he wants to be a Nazir? Maybe he's just saying, I want to do that Nazir's karbanis. I'm going to do his karbanis for him. I'm going to take his chiyuv off him and I'm going to do them instead. Maybe that's what he means. So Gemara says, no, because he tells us later that what he meant to say was that I want to be a Nazir. So Gemara says, if he tells you that's what he meant, so what's a chiddush? Of course, he said ehei, and then he explains later what he meant. So what would be the havamina that it shouldn't work? Gemara says, no, because you may think that his words that he spoke have to be clear. If he just thought in his heart and he meant, it's very good that he meant he wants to be a Nazir, but if he wasn't clear about it, so it could be that that's not going to work at all. So the answer is no, we just understand what he says. If he explains it later, that's good enough, and ehei is a good enough phrase. Right, now the Gemara goes to the case where he says, hey na, I will be beautiful. So what does that mean? So the Gemara says, okay, the Mishnah said that that's enough to create Naziris because he means I'm going to be beautiful because I'm going to have long hair like a Nazir. So Gemara asks, maybe he meant to say, I will make mitzvahs beautiful. Like it says, is a mitzvah of Zekeli Vanveyu. Make your mitzvahs beautiful. You should make a beautiful sukkah, a beautiful lulav, a beautiful tzitzis. Write a beautiful sefer Torah and wrap it in a beautiful cloak. Maybe that's what it means to say, I'm going to beautify myself. I'm going to beautify the mitzvahs. So Gemara answers, Shmuel says again, he's holding on to his hair, and therefore he clearly means I'm going to be beautiful because I'm going to have long hair like a Nazir, and he's accepting Naziris upon himself. So Gemara says, how could you call it beautiful? You want to say that Naziris is beautiful? Don't you know that Rabbi Kapper says that Naziris is a sin? A person's depriving himself. It's not something he's supposed to do. He even brings a korban nechatas at the end. Gemara says, no, Rabbi Kapper only said that about Naziris where he becomes Tomei, and he has to redo his Naziris. The halacha is if he does become Tomei Mace in the middle of his Naziris, what he did so far is canceled, he has to start over. There, he's not into it, and we're afraid he's going to do Nazir.